This podcast is supported by the original organic bedding and bath brand, Koyuchi.
Koyuchi has spent 35 years pioneering quality organic textiles, long before the word organic became, trendy. But words matter to Koyuchi. Words like craftsmanship, longevity, and wellness. So what does the word wellness mean to Koyuchi? It means that all of our products are absolutely free from harsh chemicals and dangerous toxins that can seep into your skin. It means effortless style that looks as good as it feels with naturally breathable, pre-washed organic cotton. And what does all of that mean to you? Well, it means that you can sleep well in Koyuchi's crisp, cool, luxuriously soft sheets that are ethically made and made with you in mind. Live well, sleep well with Koyuchi. And now during our Memorial Day sale event, you can enjoy 20% off organic cotton sheets, towels, and everything else at Koyuchi.com. That's Koyuchi.com for 20% off from now until May 25th. Koyuchi.com.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kim with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
The big game commercials are basically must-see TV. This year, Elf Cosmetics went all out with an absurdly funny telenovela called Melissa. It stars Melissa McCarthy, Nicholas Gonzalez, Itati Cantoral, and Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil. The Elf Glow Reviver Lip Oil is an ultra-glossy tinted lip oil that nourishes, hydrates, and enhances your lips' natural color.
Watch the full episode of their new Elf novela on soyunbaño.com.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting-mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/iHeart. That's prolonlife.com/iHeart.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to One Thing Trump Did, available exclusively on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and if you haven't already, by the way, please rate this podcast and write us a review. So if you're struggling to keep up with the torrent of headlines coming out of the Trump White House, join the club. That is why each week we pick just one thing for this podcast and focus on it, break it down in a nonpartisan way. Our one thing this week is the U.S. government group chat leaks that have come to be known as Signalgate because of the app Signal that's being used for some of these chats. The fallout from it, some of the bigger issues that are going on at the Pentagon will also be part of this discussion. So to recap, Jeffrey Goldberg, who's editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, was mistakenly added to a group chat of national security leaders on the messaging app Signal. And that group chat, which included the defense secretary, the vice president, the national security advisor, and others, was discussing imminent military action against Houthi forces in Yemen. The man who was national security advisor, Mike Waltz, has since been removed from that post, although he's also been nominated now by President Trump to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. But everyone else remains in their positions. Trump's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who was on that group chat, spoke recently in an interview with Megyn Kelly about the scandal.
It shouldn't have happened. There are sensitive conversations that occur in these signal chats, but ultimately it was not at all what those who are opposing the president's policies and those in the media made it out to be. And I can tell you that there are some of the most vocal critics of that whole situation who also use Signal and communicate things that they would not want released publicly as well.
And to that point, the Wall Street Journal has reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has discussed official Pentagon business on at least 12 Signal chat groups. Joining me now with more is NBC National Security and Defense Correspondent Courtney Kube. Courtney, it's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for including me, Jeremy.
So first of all, explain why it is such a no-no to use something like Signal to discuss highly classified military information.
There's different levels of classification for U.S. intelligence and specifically military. What we are talking about here, the original Signal chat that, as you mentioned, Jeffrey Goldberg was added into, that had information about an imminent military operation. So the very top of the chat, you see the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, writing that the mission is a go. Well, as soon as a mission is approved, the information even becomes more highly classified. And that's because you're talking about aircraft that are getting ready to take off or maybe are already in the air, headed towards their target. These are men and women whose lives could be on the line flying over a hostile area to conduct an operation. So that kind of information, so an imminent military operation, would generally be transmitted over something called JWICS. That is a very secure server that allows the military and top intelligence officials to provide information that they want to make sure no one else gets access to. So Signal, it's a commercial app. Yes, it is encrypted. Yes, people in the government and journalists and people all over the world use it because it's relatively secure. But it would never be approved for something at the level of something that would be transmitted via JWICS. Again, like specific information about aircraft being used, times that bombs would be dropping over a hostile area. And just to add to how potentially dangerous this could have been, these were airstrikes that the U.S. was about to conduct against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Since those airstrikes began on that same day, March 15th, the Houthis have shot down at least 7 U.S. drones. What that means is the airspace is contested. Now, fortunately, those are unmanned drones. The day of this Signal chat, we had manned aircraft going in the air. If the Houthis or any adversary had somehow been able to infiltrate that chat, we could have seen aircraft with men and women flying them potentially shot down.
And if an ordinary service member had done what these national security officials were doing and used a Signal chat to talk about an imminent airstrike, they would have been in very big trouble.
Most likely, they definitely would have been fired, and they most likely would have been brought up on charges. I mean, I will say Signal is used in the military, and in fact, like by special operators in the field, but not for this kind of information. You know, we keep hearing about it's for talking about logistics, it's for talking about movements and things, not for something as highly sensitive as an imminent military operation.
So here's a question. If they have access to this JWICS system, why wouldn't they use that?
So just to put it bluntly, JWICS is a pain. It's a pain to use for them because, number one, you have to be in what's known as a SCIF. It's a secure, compartmentalized information facility. So a place where there's no phones, there's no Apple Watches, there's nothing that can transmit. JWICS, from what I understand, I've never been on it, but from what I understand, it can take like 8 to 15 minutes just to get the system up and running or to get your version of email of JWICS up and loading. It's not easy to share information via JWICS because you have to have somebody who can receive it on the same system that you want to send it to. So when we're talking about something like the Signal chat that had Mike Waltz, leaders of the national security and intelligence community in the United States, they would have access to be able to get this information, but not so easily as sending it to them on a phone, on a text message.
So then the next question, I guess, is why wouldn't they use some sort of code language, at least if they're going to do this on Signal and say, we're going to do the Y and the H and the, instead of just literally spelling out exactly what they're doing and what time?
And I think before The Atlantic exposed this Signal chat, we all sort of assumed there was a piece of that. So maybe the Signal chat would be, hey, everyone, get to your skiff. Or right. Everyone, in the military, they often call it the high side. That's the SIPR or the more secure servers. Hey, everyone, check your high side. Action is beginning. So, you would expect something like that. But actually putting in the detail, that is why this has so many people in the U.S. military, in the intelligence community, just absolutely flabbergasted.
So has it stopped, do you think? Are they still using Signal for other chats?
We know that they are still using Signal for chats. For imminent military operations, we don't know, but definitely for other information.
And why hasn't the president, who loves to fire people, as we know, fired Pete Hegseth over this?
So, there's a couple of schools of thought. One could just be the media have been amplifying what happened here. I think because, I've covered the Pentagon and the military for just about 20 years now, and I've never seen anything like this from a leader. And when I look back at the secretaries of defense who I've covered since Donald Rumsfeld, I can't envision a scenario in which another secretary would have done something like this. So because it's so unprecedented and uncommon, we gave it a lot of attention. And frankly, I think that that's one of the reasons that Donald Trump doesn't want to fire him or to really reprimand him publicly, because he doesn't want to give the media that sort of a win. When the reality is, it's not reporters and media who are calling for anyone to be fired or reprimanded. We're just discussing the situation and giving the facts of what unfolded here. So, that's one school of thought. Another is when you hear President Trump talk about the Signal chat, it's not really clear whether he actually understands what happened here. At one point, he even said something like, well, we don't even know if the signal was any good. Well, it's not a signal. Signal is the name of the app. So those are just my personal guesses on what could have happened here. And then the next question is always, well, what is going to happen? Is there going to be any sort of a reprimand? And I got to tell you, Jeremy, I have absolutely no idea. The way that this has unfolded and how more and more information has come forward, and there doesn't seem to be any real accountability, I don't know how this is going to continue to unfold.
Now, I've read that Mike Waltz, who was fired as National Security Advisor, may have been removed from that position, not because of Signal, but because he's more hawkish on things like Iran than others in the administration. He just didn't fit in with Trump's idea or people in the administration's idea of what the national security policy should be. Is there truth to that?
So there is absolutely truth to the fact that there is a big divide over Iran right now. So you have the people who are very close to Israel. Israel wants to continue to strike against Iran. They had some really effective, really successful strikes back in October. They essentially crippled all of Iran's strategic air defenses. So they tend to use this air defense system called an S-300. Their radars are pretty much all busted, and it's months and months and months before they get them all back online. When you have an adversary whose air defenses are down, the fact is, it's easier for you to conduct strikes. It's less danger to your manned aircraft who would be going into this potentially hostile area to conduct a strike. We know that Israel wants to do more strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. They feel that is an existential threat to their nation. But President Trump and some people around him are completely against that. They feel they are concerned about a larger war, this escalating into a regional conflict that the U.S. would almost certainly get pulled into. I think there are a lot of people around President Trump who look back to October 7th and say they don't want to give the Biden administration any credit, but it didn't extend into a larger regional war that the U.S. got pulled into, and strikes against Iran would really threaten that balance.
Do you think that the Signalgate scandal is now over, or is there more to come and potentially more shoes to drop, more heads to roll in the administration?
I think it is absolutely possible that some of the excellent reporting that we have gotten about Signal and the use of Signal in the administration, I think that there's always the possibility that reporters will come up with more. Look, I hope it's me, right. But I think that some of my colleagues are just doing unbelievable work over the last several weeks and months on that. one definite thing that is going to get headlines is the Inspector General's work out of the Department of Defense. So they have this personnel evaluation that they're looking into the use of Signal and the information that was put in there. Now, the huge caveat to that is there's a little known policy in the United States where the Secretary of Defense, in the name of national security, can essentially not so much cancel but long-term postpone an Inspector General action. The Secretary of Defense has not done this. This was an IG action that was called, that the members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, leaders in the Senate Armed Services, called for. So that would be a huge point of contention if he were to do that. But it is a possibility. So candidly, I've been watching to see if there's any movement on that. If not, if this goes forward in an expedited manner, as the Hill has called for, that will definitely be a big headline when that comes out.
Courtney, you mentioned the reporting that you and others are doing at the Pentagon. We should note that NBC was one of the news outlets that was kicked out of the Pentagon at the beginning of the Trump administration the second time around to put in, more right-leaning news organizations or right-wing news organizations like One America News Network. How is it affecting you to not have the Pentagon office that you've had for so long?
Jeremy, it stinks. If I'm being honest, it stinks not to have we called it a booth. And I think what people don't realize is this isn't just that they kicked us out of a desk. We had these they were essentially closets that we worked out of. We had a lot of equipment. We had our own lines and a robotic camera in there. And we did live shots out of there all day long. And NBC News has had a presence at the Pentagon in a booth like that for at least 50 years. We actually can't find anyone alive who can tell us exactly when it started, but it's been decades. I was there for 20 years in that booth. Logistically, it's harder, but every single day we are still showing up and working in the Pentagon, and we're not giving up on it. It's an important building, and the issues there are critical to the American people and critical to the world. And a free press having the ability to tell those stories and to hold the leaders responsible for the decisions that they are making is so important. So we're there every single day still, no matter, even if we don't have a place to work.
Well, stay with us, because in a moment we're going to talk about what's been happening at the Pentagon aside from Signalgate. One thing Trump did with NBC national security and defense correspondent Courtney Kube. We'll be right back.
It's an Olympics you'll never forget. Prime time in Milan. The moments.
Chloe Kube with the gold medal flex.
The stars.
Ilya Malinin.
Out of this world.
The spectacle from beautiful northern Italy with very special guests every night of the Olympics. Experience the world's biggest show. Prime time in Milan. Tonight, 8/7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Ryder Strong, and I have a new podcast called The Red Weather.
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea.
In 1995, my neighbor, Anna Trainer, disappeared from a commune.
It was hard to wrap your head around. It was nature and trees and praying and drugs.
So no, I am not your guru.
And back then, I lied to my parents, I lied to police, I lied to everybody.
There were years, Ryder, where I could not say your name.
I've decided to go back to my hometown in Northern California, interview my friends, family, talk to police, journalists, whomever I can, to try to find out what actually happened.
Isn't it a little bit weird that they obsess over hippies in the woods and not the obvious boyfriend?
They have had this case for 30 years.
I'll teach you sons of to come around here and my wife. Boom, boom.
This is The Red Weather. Listen to The Red Weather on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to One Thing Trump Did on the Middle podcast feed. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This episode, we're talking about Signalgate and what it means for U.S. national security. I'm joined by NBC national security and defense correspondent Courtney Kube. So, Courtney, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, famously came from Fox News, where he was a weekend anchor. And after the Signalgate scandal broke, he fired a number of his top aides, who then said things at the Pentagon were a total mess under Hegseth. What do we know about those firings at this point? Now it's been a few weeks. And what have these people said about Hegseth?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard extensively from Dan Caldwell. He was one of the senior advisors to Secretary Hegseth, and frankly, a longtime friend of the secretary even before he was at Secretary Hegseth was at Fox News. Dan Caldwell and he knew each other from these veterans organizations. We heard from him in an extensive interview with Tucker Carlson. We also heard from Colin Carroll, who was the deputy chief of staff, or the chief of staff to the deputy secretary of defense, Steve Feinberg. He was also fired that same week. He gave a long interview to Megyn Kelly. And as you said, they both laid out problems and how the Pentagon is being managed under Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Now, in both cases, they were accused by the secretary of leaking classified information. And while we have since heard a number of different stories that they may have been involved in, there have been no official charges. We're not aware of any investigation. We know that there was one sort of administrative investigation that was closed, but they both are now saying that there is a side investigation, or sort of like almost a rogue investigation against them, that's being carried out by people close to Secretary Hegseth, looking for any kind of information that about them having been leakers of classified information. It's been several weeks, and as of today, we still aren't aware of anything to substantiate those allegations, but they were fired over it.
One person that was not fired is the deputy defense secretary, who is Hegseth's, I guess, number two, who is a billionaire, by the way, Stephen Feinberg. How much power does he have in the Pentagon?
It's fascinating how sort of the roles and responsibilities have equaled out here between him and Secretary Hegseth. Secretary Hegseth definitely is more of the face of the Pentagon, right? He likes to go out and work out with troops, and loves to do a very dramatic video where he signs a memo and talks about it. And they tend to be about three different topics for the most part. Stephen Feinberg, as you mentioned, he is a rich billionaire. He doesn't have any experience in government, and everyone around him tells me that he's more interested in sort of sitting in his office, working through the numbers, the day-to-day administrative business of the Pentagon, and that he doesn't want to be in front of a camera. He doesn't want to talk to the media. He is more than happy to be the one who runs the building. He's had a huge part in the cuts. He seems to be one of the main, if not the main, liaison with the DOJ personnel who are trying to cut contracts and programs and personnel and staff. And he definitely seems to be sort of the budget guy for the Pentagon. So it's interesting how the two of them have sort of their roles have really leveled out.
It's for so long been notoriously difficult for anybody to cut any money out of the Pentagon. Are they actually going to come up with some cuts that will make a difference in the budget?
That is a $1 trillion question right now among the press corps, because, they keep they'll come forward and say, well, we just cut another so many hundreds of millions of dollars out. There's a number that they've been throwing around, and that is Secretary Hegseth has been throwing around of $5 billion or maybe $6 billion that they've been able to cut. But the press corps has been asking and asking for any specifics on that, and we don't have them. They have given us some information about a couple of contracts that have been cut. Now, so far, all of the contracts that we're aware of were ones that had already been paid out. So they essentially were ending them so they wouldn't put more money out. But it's also not clear that all of them would have been re-upped anyway. But that has amounted to, hundreds of millions of dollars. Most of those contracts have had something to do with diversity initiatives or maybe climate. There will be some savings because of, we know of at least 22,000 individuals who have taken the fork in the road and are leaving. So there'll be some personnel cuts. They're making some cuts to some other programs. But for the most part, there is very, very little transparency into exactly where this alleged trillions of dollars in cuts have come from.
Now Hegseth says he wants to cut the number of 4-star generals across the military by 20%. Why does he want to do that? What kind of an effect will that have?
Yeah, so this is something that he talked about even before he became the secretary. He has this sort of grand plan for the military about, if you think of the military as a triangle and you have general officers and flag officers at the top and you have the sort of rank and file men and women towards the bottom. Yes, they make up a bigger proportion, but he wants to make that triangle even flatter. He wants to have more people out in the field, again, like the rank and file people who could potentially be sent to the front lines on a moment's notice, and fewer people back in the headquarters who are telling them what to do. The reality is he's not alone in thinking that this is a problem, but there has been some criticism about the way he's going about it by sort of putting this, 20%, and you're going to cut 20%. The military is not a monolith, and the services are very different. The size of the Marine Corps is very different than the size of the active duty Army. So there has been some criticism about just this hatchet cut with a somewhat arbitrary number, and we'll see how that actually plays out. I mean, one simple way that I think that we're going to see some of these cuts is consolidating some of the combatant commands. We're already seeing a little bit of that, consolidating Army Futures Command with Training and Doctrine Command. You could take 2 4-stars and cut that into 1 4-star and maybe a 2-star sub-commander. That's an easy way to potentially get rid of a 3-star and a 4-star right there. But we'll see how this actually plays out. I think he's going to meet more resistance to this than he realizes.
Some of the people who've been removed from their positions within the military at the highest levels are the first woman to run the Navy, the first African-American chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. From your reporting, is that because the administration considers them DEI hires just because they're not white men?
So we've gotten different stories on that. Yes, people around the secretary have said, yeah, they're DEI hires, but there's also been, arguments about how they were just too focused on DEI initiatives. So it's less about the fact that they were, a woman or a man of color or Hispanic or whatever it is, and more about some of the priorities that they placed while they were in their leadership positions. But, we got to remember here, there is civilian control of the military. So keep in mind something like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, C.Q. Brown, who was fired back in February. One of the things that the secretary and many people around him were upset about was he signed this memo that they said was assigning quotas for the Air Force when he was the Air Force Chief of Staff. Well, the Secretary of the Air Force was setting those conditions that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force basically, can give his best military advice, but at the end of the day, there's civilian control. He has to carry out the commands and the plans and the policies of the civilian leaders, and that was what he was doing. That was one of the big issues that Secretary Hegseth and some of the people who are sort of the more MAGA parts of the Pentagon and the administration had with C.Q. Brown.
Right. But what you're saying is like they have to follow orders, and those were the orders that they were given from the civilian leadership.
Exactly. And by following that, and then they were later punished. And Jeremy,
that, right.
We've not seen the end of that. We will see more senior military officers removed from their positions or fired. Their careers ended because of their carrying out policies under the Biden administration.
There's another thing that's happening. The Supreme Court is now allowing the administration to ban transgender service members. There are at least 4,000 of them. What's been the reaction to that?
So I still don't think, I think there's going to be more fighting on this in the courts. Secretary Hegseth put out a memo saying, he likes to say that there are no more trans, there's no room for trans in the military. I just don't believe that the memo that he put out saying that everyone either has to self-identify if they are transgender or even more specifically, if they either have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or they have been treated for gender dysphoria in some sort of a medical capacity in their time in uniform, then they have to self-identify by June 6th. Or they will be identified. I don't know exactly what that means. How are we going to have essentially a witch hunt here where people are identifying someone in their unit as being a transgender service member? And also there's very little fidelity about what about someone who transitioned when they were in high school and then joined, or before that, and then joined the military. So their entire time in the military, they've identified as one, as being a male or a female, even if that's not the sex that they were born. Well, what happens to them? Are they then kicked out? There are so many questions, and we've been pressing the Department of Defense about this for months since the executive order was first signed. And it seems as if the services are still working out the specifics on this. But I personally would be shocked to see thousands of service members forced out of the military over this. They in part because if they don't self-identify, at what point do their HIPAA rights, do their privacy rights for their health care kick in and they can't be identified by a commander? These are questions that we all have, though.
Interesting. So even though we've gotten a Supreme Court ruling allowing the administration to do this, you think it's not the last word?
I don't. I still believe there will be more legal challenges to this.
Interesting. So the Trump administration has been touting strong military recruitment since Trump took office. It looks like that did start before he came in, but it has accelerated since he's been president. What can you tell us about that? Is that a good news story out of the Pentagon?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely recruiting is up. It was pretty consistently up in 2024, and that was in large part due to these pretty aggressive measures that the services took, particularly the Army took, to try to bring more service members in. Now, they also lowered the total number of recruits they had to bring in, so the threshold or the number that they had to meet is lower. But it was lower in 2024 as well. The Army is really the outlier in this. The other services were meeting their goals for the most part throughout 2024. They're still at about 100%, maybe a little bit over that, but we haven't seen giant jumps. Active duty Army, though, their numbers have gone up here. But there is one other thing to keep in mind. As part of this recruiting effort and this effort to try to bring more people into the military when recruiting numbers were pretty bad for several years, the Army basically created sort of a pool of recruits. So when they were meeting their numbers in 2024, they delayed the shipping people to basic training so that they would have sort of a pool, a reserve of people to send. That has kept their numbers pretty consistent, but it is definitely accurate to say that in 2025, since the inauguration, the active duty Army has seen even more people join.
Courtney, we're talking all here about the sort of inner workings at the Pentagon, all your amazing reporting about all these various aspects of how the Defense Department works. But really, at the end of the day, what they're doing is about the defense of the U.S., the wars that the U.S. fights overseas. Where is the focus right now, if you can say there is a focus? Is it on Russia and Ukraine? Is it on Israel and Gaza? Is it on what's happening now, India and Pakistan, or on potential threat from China, maybe invading Taiwan? Where are people focused when it comes to what the Defense Department is actually working on?
The biggest focus by far is the southern border and immigration, by far. It is the biggest. I mean, they are very proud of the efforts. The Department of Defense is very proud of the efforts that they have made there, how they've been able to curb. They claim that it's the military presence and the military action that has been able to dramatically curb the flow of immigrants across the border into the United States. They have sent about 11,000 U.S. troops are now along the border in some capacity. They've sent strikers. They've created this new buffer zone. That is by far the biggest by far the biggest focus of the Department of Defense under Secretary Hegseth. If I had to say one sort of foreign policy thing, they are very focused on China as well and the concern about China. But what's fascinating is, despite that being such a focus, they are doing things that don't seem strategically aligned with that concern. So, for instance, moving air defense systems out of the Asia-Pacific, out of the Indo-Pacific, to the Middle East. This huge offensive that they took against the Houthi rebels in Yemen, that doesn't seem to be aligned with the priority of China, but that is, that's been one of their big offensives. Their biggest.
Well, and you could say also putting tariffs on all your friends as well would not necessarily align with trying to be tough on China when you're also putting big tariffs on, Canada and Europe and on the United Kingdom until, I guess, this trade agreement. One more thing, Courtney, you've been there for how many years have you been covering the Pentagon?
It'll be 20 in about a month.
20 years. Okay. So coming right after 9/11 was the beginning for you, and the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. You've been there during real wartime when the U.S. has, tens of thousands, even more than 100,000 troops serving in war zones around the world. How does it feel right now compared to that? Because it does feel, just from the torrent of stuff coming out of the Pentagon, that there's a lot going on right now, but we're not at war the way that we were back then.
Yeah, I have never experienced a time in the Pentagon where I have felt so much upheaval in the building. And keep in mind, when right before and about the time that Secretary Rumsfeld was about to be fired, there was a lot of uneasiness in the building. I was there through the surge in Iraq, which was extremely controversial, and we were watching service members die on almost daily basis in Iraq. The beginning of U.S. strikes in Libya, the beginning of the U.S. efforts in Syria, the beginning of the war in Ukraine. I mean, you name it. I have been there through some difficult, controversial, and candidly scary times at the Pentagon. And I think what's so different now is there's never been a time where I have felt there is so much upheaval in the front office. So in the Secretary of Defense's office, it feels as if they are struggling on a day-to-day basis just to kind of keep the wheels turning. And that's unlike any time I've ever felt.
Courtney Kube, NBC's national security and defense correspondent. Courtney, thank you so much for your great reporting and for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
And thanks to you for listening to One Thing Trump Did. It was produced by Harrison Patino. Our next middle episode will be in your podcast feed later this week. We'll be asking you how the tariffs are affecting you, if you're feeling that yet. Our theme music was composed by Noah Haidu. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Talk to you soon.
You see it instantly. It's Coldwater Creek, the mark of exceptional workmanship and signature touches inspired by a Mountain West heritage. Distinctive styles created from quality fabrics, silhouettes perfected with just the right drape, feel-good fits offering ease of movement, and thoughtful details to elevate your look. Coldwater Creek's authenticity is embodied in every piece, embracing its confident spirit that carries through to today. Discover Coldwater Creek clothing, designed to fit your life the way you want. For a wardrobe you can count on season after season, visit coldwatercreek.com. Shop the new spring collection at 20% off $75 or more with code IHEART20.
Over the last couple years, didn't we learn that the folding chair was invented by Black people because of what happened in Alabama?
The Montgomery Brawl.
This Black History Month, the podcast Selective Ignorance with Mandy B unpacks Black history and culture with comedy, clarity, and conversations that shake the status quo. The Crown Act in New York was signed in July of 2019, and that is a bill that was passed to prohibit discrimination based on hairstyles associated with race. To hear this and more, listen to Selective Ignorance with Mandy B from the Black Effect Podcast Network on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I actually drop better when I'm high. It heightens my senses, calms me down. If anything, I'm more careful. Honestly, it just helps me focus.
That's probably what the driver who killed a 4-year-old told himself. And now he's in prison. You see, no matter what you tell yourself, if you feel different, you drive different. So if you're high, just don't drive. Brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.